I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Marc. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Tanya, I'm so excited to be here and excited for where the conversation might go.
So tell us your story.
Oh, such a big, such a big question. And I fashion myself as a story expert of sorts. And there's no, one story, but the one I think that you're probably asking for is how I got here today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll try to keep it really quick, but I grew up in the Detroit area, and I like to say it was a great upbringing, but nothing really happened. And I was just always fascinated, and my whole contextual sort of way of interpreting the world was through movies. And so I thought that was like kind of real life. And I thought California was hands down the greatest place on the planet, just based on seeing it in the movies and being immersed in print publications like Thrasher and things like that. So as soon as I left college, I went out to Hollywood and worked in the movie business. And I was really fortunate to start my career working at Disney Imagineering, which led to working with the director Oliver Stone for a few years as the story editor of their production company, which at the time was called Illusion Entertainment. And that's where I really fell in love with this idea of storytelling, and went on to work on a few other movies. But I was young and I'd written some scripts, and I was kind of like, I'm not sure this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I came out to Boulder, Colorado, and for a break. And I'd always loved the Colorado. I'd kind of dreamed of this dual life of living out here and working in the movie business, which I realized at the time was much harder, probably much more of a reality now. And there was this amazing thing happening. There was this complete explosion of entrepreneurs and startups, and it was this huge movement. And I was like, these people are cool. These are the people that I want to hang out with. And so I kind of bopped around. I did some different things. People were asking me all the time, can you help us tell our story? And I was like, yes, that's what I do. I could do that. But then like half the time it was like miserable. Like it didn't work out. It was a failed engagement because our definition of what storytelling was in business wasn't aligned. Like I thought it was one thing. They thought it was working on a CEO keynote or their about page. Neither of us really had the language or the perspective of what that storytelling meant. And things kept going on. I started another business. I had a tech business that sold collaborative services, just like we're on with Zoom, but it was phone stuff. I built that business up. It was a great little business. I wasn't always the best at business, but I did love the branding and marketing of that business, and that's what made it successful. And I was able to sell that. And in parallel, I was always doing branding and marketing work for friends and kind of learning what I was doing. And I had started this business, Wildstory, probably about 8 years ago. And at one point, I looked back and I'm like, oh wow, like we're doing branding, but what does that mean? What is a brand? Because to me, growing up, I always thought branding was a logo. I mean, that's even what I called it when we were building our first company. I was like, let's brand this thing. Let's get a logo. Let's get some colors. Let's get some hats. Let's build a website. And, a lot of the challenges that I realized looking back that I had in business were all due to this sort of wrong definition of brand and really focusing on logo, website, touch points, external touch points. And we can talk about why that was. And so today I run a brand strategy and design studio called Wildstory, and we are really focused on helping businesses outmaneuver their competition. And what I'm here and hopefully we'll share today is like, I believe brand building is how you build a business. It's what leads to profit. It's not about all these visual touch points. And it's the single best way, especially in these just different times. It's about to say uncertain times, but I feel like that's like a little like in these uncertain times, like that sounds like, but like
that's the movie part coming out. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. But in these times where we're all questioning it, and I'm part of that group, I don't have it figured out. This is a weird thing going on right now. It kind of, I feel like we've been getting out of the pandemic, and now we're kind of getting back into it. I'm starting to feel personally a little bit of that anxiety that I'm seeing from other businesses. I've been feeling it myself, like, hey, what's going to happen this quarter? So we've all got a lot to do. And I think that we can deal with a lot of those things and recenter our business through a lot of brand and brand work.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, because I think, it's so funny because whenever I hear the word branding, it always takes me back to my farm days. Like I think of branding cattle, right? And that's what it really was. Like it was your logo steered into the side of an animal. And so I think, even today, I would have to admit that, my view isn't the same. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going around branding people or like throwing stickers on everything. But I think a lot of people sort of get stuck in I don't really know how, I don't know how to look at my brand because all I am seeing is my website, what I'm posting on social media, my logo, those sort of things, and making sure that the colors match and all of that other stuff. So let's dive a little bit into branding and what people should actually be looking at.
Yeah, and I love the example of branding cattle, and that is where that term comes from. That's where the origin of brand. And why did people brand cattle? It was to protect their assets. And effectively, that's why we come up with visual marks, logos, specific processes and copyrights and copy. It's to protect our asset, which is our business. And so that people know it's who we are. And that's why, we're, big brands are very quick to litigate if you encroach on their brand properties. And so that's where it all comes from. But, let's talk a little bit about what branding is. And, I like to, a lot of people think it's these touch points, but I like to use the definition that comes from a good friend and mentor of mine, Marty Neumeier, is kind of like, he is the epitome of brand. And he says, that your brand is the gut feeling people have about your products or services. So that's a pretty nebulous kind of definition. It's like how people feel about your brand. And I like to really use the relate it back to people. Like each one of us has a brand, and we always have a gut feeling about someone because of how they consistently show up, but we just don't think about it very much. But your business is very much like that. But what does that mean in business terms? What does that mean in how our businesses operate? Well, in any given market, right, if you think about it, there is a price people will pay for goods and services. And there's really only a couple ways to increase your market share. You can raise your profit or your bottom line. You can raise that price, or you can lower your costs. And you can, I'm using my hands because I'm kind of thinking it visually, like you can stretch that out right on a continuum. Well, we can only lower prices so far. And in any given market, there's only room for one competitor to be the cheapest. And I like to say for everything else, there's brand, for everyone else, there's branding, but you have your cost, because someone will always be like, well, what about Amazon? What about Costco? Absolutely. But when you think about brands that are able to play the price game, it's at scale. And most of us aren't at that type of scale. I mean, there's only one Amazon, there's only one Walmart, it's a very different game. Well, then how do we increase value and price? How do we charge more? And that's by increasing perceived value, or that gut feeling people have about your products or services. So if that's all true and you're with me and you're following so far, how do we do that? Well, what I like to think about is that your brand really is, you have this internal brand, which comprises things like your purpose. Why are you in business beyond making money? Your vision, your values, your commitments that you're going to make. And then who do you serve? Who's your primary customer? What makes you different? and how you do what you do. That's all kind of like the internal stuff, right? That's all things that we talk about with our teams around the table. We can define that, we can articulate that, we can put words to it. And so, that's like, for us, that's the first part of our process. We do all that stuff. We call that brand strategy, but people have different names for it. But really working out those ideas of who you are and what you stand for. And then we get into all these design stuff. Phase two is like taking that information, designing our touch points, things like logos, things like websites, because what those are, I've built a lot of businesses and I get really excited. I mean, there's nothing more fun than unveiling like a new logo and all that. Like, that is the fun stuff,
Yeah, that's my favorite part. And I've owned quite a few businesses, but my favorite part is always that, like, ripping the paper off of the window kind of thing. And being like, ta-da!
So fun. It's so fresh. It's kind of like, it's a new relationship. There's nothing wrong with it yet,
Yeah. Everybody's still excited to be involved.
Yeah. And it's updated, it's like when you get a new wardrobe and you're current, and that always feels really good. And then the phase three, once we have that, is to do the actual telling, where you have to go out and you have to, all these things you define in phase one and all these communication tools you built in phase two. In phase three, you actually have to go out now and live that. And you have to communicate that in a way that is consistent and believable to your audience. Now, I'll say right away, like, look, most of the businesses I work with are not .orgs. They are .coms. They're here to make money. And so, they're really focused on, well, how does this translate to the bottom line? And what happens is I want to challenge all your listeners right now to think about their own buying habits, right? And all the emotional qualifiers you put on any type of product you buy. Now, of course, there's some commoditized items, but even those, like Morton's salt is a commodity, but Morton's has built a brand name, a reputation around salt. And when you look at salt in the grocery aisle, you're like, I could buy this salt from the grocery store brand, or I could buy Morton's, and you buy Morton's. And some people do and some people don't. And that's okay. That's the, Morton's decision of how they're going to acquire customers. And we also know that there's going to be value commodity shoppers that are going to go for the other salt. But we make decisions based on emotion. And I like to say that by the time we meet most of our customers, they're not so much buying as they are choosing. And what I mean by that is they've made up their mind that they need salt. They've made up their mind that they need branding services. They've made up their mind they need a new car, right? And think about, like, when you go and make a big purchase, I need a new computer. Great. Now I'm going to start researching and buying into that type of product that I want. And a lot of times in any buying situation, you have tactical buyers and you have emotional buyers. And those tactical buyers are going to be like, okay, what are the features? What's the practicality? Emotional buyers are going to be like, oh, does it make me feel creative? Does it make me part of the community of interesting people when I buy this product? And I like to think that most of us have both of those qualities when we buy. And for me, I'm heavily weighted. I'm an emotional buyer. I know this, and I think about, those things that when I buy, it's all about how it makes me feel. And then, of course, I like to use the example of a car. When I go to buy a car, it has to fit the category. It has to fit, what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for an SUV, it has to fit that category. But then it has to fit within my budget. But once I have those parameters, it becomes all about the story I'm telling myself and how I feel. And that's all through, when we kind of come back to that idea of those companies increasing the perceived value of any given product at any given time.
It's so funny, because as you're saying that, I was thinking, which one do I fall under? And I was realizing just recently I'd been doing just that, like looking for a new car. And whereas typically, like, features were my thing, right? I had a younger family, so I was all about, like, what features are involved in it. And this time it totally changed. Like, it was really based on, I'm tired of having a mom car. So I was really looking at cars that were not practical. Like, Challengers and Mustangs. And like, I was like, I want a muscle car. Like, I want people to look at this car and go, does she have kids? Like, I want it to be a question. I don't want it to be so it's funny how, even in my own, I realize that, the older I get, the more that switches over, where it's not all about the cheapest price to me. Like it used to be when I was younger. It was like, what can I get that is in my price range? That was it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I'll even, suggest that when, you're in the mom mode, you're looking at features that are about safety, are about convenience. Why? Because you want to be a good mom.
Yeah.
And how do you show that you're a good mom? How do you show love in your vehicle? As this example, it's the safe choice. It's the choice that helps shuttle my kids around, effectively and efficiently to their activities and things like that. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think like, in thinking of that is realizing, all of the steps that we hear so much, like who is your target audience, and realizing, who is that you're trying to go after? Are you going after, me as the mom, or me as my kids are now teenagers and it's time for me to, be cool again. And really understanding, who is it that you're targeting? Because that same client that you might have had a few years ago, like if the salesman who came after me a few years ago would try to use the same tactics, this totally wouldn't work.
Totally. And I think that, and that's why, like, you see some car brands that just proliferate and have so many brands. And I think, that they go through that exact same conversation. Like, what is the life cycle of Tanya from first car buyer to through her whole life? And, and that's why you see all these different models, all these different sub brands, why you see luxury offshoots, you see Lexus from Toyota and, all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, they understand that now. I think part of the, we could talk about this for a while, but one of the challenges, especially in me coming from Detroit, I'm very familiar with like how the American car brands got so diluted, and and then all of a sudden they try to be all things to all people, and they fall in that trap. And you're like, well, what is a Chevy? What is a Ford? And I think it's a lot easier for someone to like tell you what a Volvo is, or what a Mercedes is, or BMW, like they're, because they're more narrowly focused. But yeah, I mean, I think that really that's a big part of brand building. And I alluded to it a little bit when I was talking about my first business. I mean, those are some of the things that I didn't totally think about when I built that business. I jumped in and I was like, I know how to sell this stuff. I know there's a need, but I wasn't really focused on that target customer, or finding a target customer that was underserved and where the competition wasn't, and really finding opportunity. And there's some different ways that we do that through the branding process as well.
Well, and I think, we hear so much about it, but I think there's still a lot of fear among entrepreneurs of really, niching down or targeting down, because they think, well, I'm missing all of these other, these other people. And in some businesses, it's easy to sort of target down. Just as an example, we own a martial arts studio. Our target market isn't athletic, like super athletic people, which a lot of people think, because we sort of went through some branding stuff and people are like, no, that's who it would be. And I'm like, it's not. Like, that's not who we get. Like, we get the kids who are like the one-offs, who don't feel like they fit in, who are like, sort of the losers, the kids that were picked on. Like, those are sort of all of the words that we hear. Those are the kids that we often see that come to us. That's who's attracted to, our sort of genre. But that was a hard thing to come to terms with, right? Because of course we wanted to say, we're for everybody, like all ages, we accept all ages, but that, so I think that sometimes that, that can be hard. Can you talk a little bit about, really finding that target market that you're wanting to go after?
Yeah. So I love that example. I think it's so fantastic, because you're absolutely right. I think that most people would assume that a martial arts studio is going to have, people that are super macho or aggressive, and you've identified the opposite. And I'm assuming that it's had an amazing effect in terms of your marketing, as well as it just makes it easier. What I want to say to people that are afraid of choosing a target like you did before we talk a little bit how to do that, is that it doesn't mean you're not going to accept someone that is macho and comes to your studio and feels that it's a good fit for them. And you're going to say, yes, like come join us, but that's not who we are. And that's not who we're initially talking to, but it doesn't mean you have to turn that business away, provided they're a good fit. That being said, maybe you've determined that those type of people are an awful fit and that they're hard to work with and they're not ideal customers. And A, you want to initially repel them, or B, when they come to apply, be like, I don't know, this is a good fit for you. I mean, there's different ways of looking at that. But, we go through an entire process of, like I kind of mentioned, and it really does emanate and it ladders up. So we really start with brands thinking about their purpose. Like, why are they here? Like, why do they exist? And I would imagine, and maybe, a purpose that might come out of brand work for a martial arts studio for years, you might start being like, hey, we're here to train, we're here to help people defend themselves, and then, a lot of work and a lot of conversation. And maybe, the purpose is really like, we're here to build confidence in those that aren't confident, or something of that nature. And you're like, oh, wow, that's why we're really here. We're here for those who can't speak for themselves. And then you can ladder up on that, and you can go through some vision and values work. But when you get to the customer profile, there you start to like, who is our customer? You start to be really honest. And not only who is our customer, I think a great question to ask is, who do you want to serve? Like who do you want to be your customer? And then who also has a need for what you're buying? That's a very critical question that I've sort of bypassed sometimes in my career, because I'm like, oh, I want to sell this thing. I have an amazing offering. I believe in this. But if someone else doesn't believe in it or want to pay for it, I want to sell to the believers. I don't want to like try to convert a lot of people to my way of thinking. And we do that. And then the last way, we try to be different. So like, how can we be different in our space? And one of the things, and if I wish I had a little better visual, but one of the things that I love to use is a 2x2 matrix. And there's different accesses that you can use, but the way that we do it is, how do the customers perceive you? So some different things you could put on the axis are hardcore studio, family studio, right? And then maybe it could be expensive and value priced. And you can start to take your logo and everybody else's logo. You can do this on a whiteboard. You can do it on a digital whiteboard tool. You can do it, I mean, I do it a lot of times on a sketchbook. I just take a Sharpie and draw it. And then I've even come to taking where I'll print out logos of competitors and I'll cut them out, and then I'll just start sliding them around, and you try to find where can you have space in your industry. When doing this, it's really important to use the words and the buying criteria that your customers use to make decisions. So how are customers evaluating martial arts studio? Is it, and I can imagine it might be, is it, intense or like lower key? Is it family or pro athlete? I mean, there's all these different things that they're probably going to be looking at. Is it for experienced or newbies and these types of things? And what I'll say about this whole process is, very rarely do I ever get the 2x2 right the first time. And so I really encourage, if people want to play with this and try to find a market or find an advantage in their market, is you can play with it. Like, you're going to like do a ton of these until you kind of find what's going on in your marketplace, and you can find some white space.
Well, and I think, when you were saying that, I think too, sometimes people get stuck and they go, well, I don't know what people are looking for, but really it's, what are people asking when they're, when they're calling in? Because I think all of the things like that you had mentioned, in keeping with the example for myself, is I just started writing down, what are people asking when they call in? Like, what is the common, like, what's the question I'm answering all the time? And then it took a lot of years for me to go, maybe that's what I should be addressing. Like, maybe that's what I need to be putting out there, because I'm tired of answering this question over and over and over again.
What was the question?
Usually we get two. One, is it competitive? And usually they want the answer to be no. it's not required. Fundraising was another one that we used to get like this was before COVID. Is fundraising required because it was a sport activity? And then the other one was, is it family oriented? That was a big one for them. So because again, a lot of the people that we had coming to us, were saying their kids were being bullied, or they were very, very shy. Like, my child is extremely shy, or, has some learning disabilities. Can you guys, is that okay, kind of thing. And that we were like, yes, that's exactly who we want. Like, we promise your kid won't be shy in 3 classes. Because that was our, like, we loved that. That was like such a challenge, right? When someone go, no, my kid is like super, super shy. We're like, just give them to us.
Yeah.
We'll break that.
Yeah. And so a couple things from that, which I just love, is that if that wasn't who you were, if you were competitive, you have the opportunity to say, no, actually, we are competitive, and that's who we're looking for. But I'd also love to know, and we can either share it now or just offline. It's like, there's probably something there about you and your team about why you want those kids, like why you want those students versus the competitive, that there's an underlying belief, an underlying purpose. And that's what, when we really get down to it, that's what people want to know. They want to know, to my point, people are calling you, they're choosing a martial arts studio. They've already decided that they're interested in it. You've already, they've heard about it somehow. Now it's like they're looking for the studio that's for them, that aligns with their values and beliefs, and your values and beliefs also need to align with your customers. So it's really great example, and I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah. And I think, it of course, when we had started back in, in the 80s, well, my husband had started back in the 80s with doing it. It really was, it was different. I mean, it was based on, more competition, more competitors, more athletic. And I think over the years, it was a hard, shift for us to almost change that brand and realize that we were changing that brand, because we were seeing, those kids, but I think it came to a point that we both were that child once. We both were that kid who had siblings who were very active in team sports, and we didn't fit in there. So it was a relatable thing. Like, we were like, we understand when you're not the soccer kid, you're not the hockey kid. And so then where can you belong? Where is there a place for you to fit in, that you can still be a part of a group, but be by yourself, or feel like you're by yourself? So it changed, it really changed for us, to realizing that it was family. That's what it was really about. It was creating this other atmosphere that all of these kids that felt like they didn't belong now had a whole different family.
I just got like goosebumps, thinking
Oh,
about that. But I love that. That was weird. But like that's when it, like, you're onto something. And I think that, at least from my own experience, both building businesses and working with other businesses, we go through different cycles. And I think that your story is just such a great illustration. My guess is, back in the 80s, you had a business, you were younger, you're like, we just got to make money. We got to make this thing work. We got bills to pay, and that is a very real, normal thing. And I am never going to come on here and be like, you should do this huge branding thing first. Like, see if your business works, and there are a lot of things you can do prior to set yourself up for success. But then you get to a point, and I think we all get this way, whether we're entrepreneurs or in our careers, or we're just kind of like, what's this all about? Why am I here? What's the meaning? Like, what is this about beyond making money? And, you just shared this great purpose that you have to be this place for those that don't have a place. And right, that resonates, and that's amazing. And that, I'm sure, many times, whether you think of it consciously or unconsciously, pulls you through the tough times. It also is a guiding light for, like, who's your customer, why you doing what you're doing. It's a decision-making guideline that helps you stay on track and build a great business. And bringing it all back to branding, it helps you show up consistently.
Yeah.
And that's all we really want. I mean, some people will argue that that people want authenticity, and I'll counter that. There's a lot of things that a lot of great brands that are inauthentic, that are fabricated, that we know are fabricated. As long as they show up, like the Spice Girls, right? The Spice Girls are not an authentic brand, but they're a very consistent brand. They show up, and we love it, And so, show up consistently. It allows you to show up and allow people to know what they expect and to come into your world, and then you can go ahead and turn a profit, which is why we're all really here.
And I like what you said about that there's nothing wrong with that, because I think people get stuck in that, right? Like, it, depending on what demographic you're serving, it's almost like that's still today, that concept of like making money is, people shy away from that. And I always think like, well, why are you in business? Isn't that the whole purpose? Like, don't be, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not, an evil thing, but it can be hard to figure that stuff out. So if a business is sitting there and going, I kind of have an idea, but I'm not sure, because we can sit in our own head and go, I think this works. But it's hard to, sometimes to see, out of the forest. How do you work with people? What are ways that they can sort of research you? Because they already know they need that. So how can they find more out about you?
Yeah. And I think that the questions they're going to be sitting around saying are, I need a new website. I need a new logo. Then we'll talk. And I'll be like, well, why? And then we'll, after a lot of conversation, we'll come, well, because we're not gaining, the amount of customers that we want. We're not getting the ideal, because our business isn't performing the way it should. And that's what's going to signal that they probably have a branding problem. To research me, I've made it really, really easy. And as I mentioned, I am the principal at Wildstory, and we're a brand strategy studio. But I've put together a page of resources that everyone listening can go to. So it's really easy. I know you might be in the car or something like that. You can go to www.wildstory.com/goodstuff. And on there, we have all sorts of resources. I'm very active on Instagram. I post all sorts of thoughts and ideas on brand building. We have a free 3-minute audit that you can go take and get your score immediately to assess the health of your brand. I also have a podcast, the Baby Got Backstory podcast, where we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs about their story. All sorts of resources, very nice and easy. And you can also just reach out to me directly from that page and say, hey, Mark, I have a question and I would love to chat with you.
So tell us a little bit more about your podcast, because I've been listening to a couple of episodes, and I do, first of all, love the name.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the podcast is similar, I think, at least in spirit to yours, and that I love speaking to entrepreneurs, people that have built great brands, whether they've been the founder or just instrumental from a marketing perspective. And I love hearing how they got there. And so we go through different brands. We've had brands such as Priceline.com, UGG boots, Build-A-Bear Workshop was a great one. We've had Patagonia on there. And so we go through and we talk with different brand builders. Right now we're on hiatus, but the next season will be coming out this fall.
Oh, awesome. Well, we'll make sure that we link to all of those places and definitely to the podcast, so people can, hear it when it comes out. There was so much packed into this, Mark. Thank you so much. I really think it'll, give people an idea to sit down and, realize if they're starting a business, to really start thinking of that. But also too, I think we've heard from, a lot of our listeners, who are listening right now, who are thinking, maybe it's time to revamp or, sort of change the wardrobe, change the look of everything, freshen stuff up a little bit. I think that this episode's definitely going to give them tips on how to even start thinking about that. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I will, some people come to me and they say, Mark, this sounds like a lot of work. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it is just, to your point, a refresh versus a rebrand. And sometimes, when you're remodeling your house, you can just throw some paint up and maybe some new countertops. And yeah, that's pretty, light skin. Sometimes you got to take things down to the studs. And it really all comes down to, what are your goals as a business and what are you trying to achieve? And that's what this is really all about, is giving you an operating system, a way to go out and address your market so your business can be successful. So if you're not having the success in your business that you think you should be having, this is something to at least look at and say, hey, is it because I don't have a strong brand strategy, and am I not communicating that strategy clearly with, my design and my deliverables?
Love that. Oh, thank you so much.
Tanya, thank you so much for having me. This was so great. Loved it.
So much good stuff. So many things I'm going to have to myself go back to the drawing board, because I realize there's some things that I want to change. So I hope you were just as inspired as I was, and to maybe just take a different look at who your target market is. Have they changed over the years? I know mine have in all of my businesses, and that's partly due to me changing the type of customers that I want to deal with, the type of things that I want to do. And so I think this is, a good thing to even just take a look and go, maybe there's something to this. So, and I love a good story. So make sure that you're doing that storytelling, that you're sharing those whys that you're doing things. It's always important for people to know. And there's always somebody who wants to hear it. So as always, you can head to our website at foxtalksbusiness.ca. Click on blogs on the left-hand side. You will see this episode and all of the ways that you can connect with Marc and Wildstory, and as well find all of his really cool links. So we're going to have the links to his website and some free material, as well as his podcast. I'm really excited for new episodes to be coming out for that. So next week, we are going to be talking about things that I've found. So this is an episode that I want to do because I talk a little bit, some fun things that I found while digging through some old notebooks and some files, what they mean to me, what I'm doing with. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of insight to something that I've been working on sort of on the down low, but it's out now, and it's going to be out even more next episode. So make sure you tune into that. So no matter what you're doing today, whether you're telling a story or whether you're reading one, make sure you find time to have fun. Because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?